that's when Satan keeps coming back, and our hearts and our minds are a little more muddied than we'd be willing to accept or think at a previous time. And so those things get stirred up because God wants us to grow closer to Him, not to try to build up character to the point that we can be separate from Him, right? The whole point of discovering more about ourselves is with the purpose of walking in closer relationship with God. Welcome to the Train to Serve YouTube channel, where we are trying to create a toolkit of resources to help you establish a culture of servant leadership in your church or ministry. So I encourage you to take a minute to look down below and get the free discipleship outline that we're offering to you. All you need to do is share your email with us, and if you don't unsubscribe, you'll be able to get access to a weekly newsletter with resources and materials that you can use to continue to grow and to use in your personal ministry. So now to the video. Welcome back. And like I mentioned in our previous videos, we're kind of circling back to the different categories of our discipleship outline to continue to make that tool as useful to you as possible. And doing that by helping you understand each of these categories, why we have them in there, and how they can help you in your discipling relationship just a little bit better each time. That's why I wanted to go ahead and circle back to the second category on our discipleship outline, that of emotional health and discovery. And I think this one's is crucial because if we're honest, we continue to surprise ourselves each and every year, right? There are things in our life that we thought were past us, that we've already graduated from, that we haven't. And there's new tricks that we can learn that we never thought we'd be capable of. And I think that just continues to bear out year after year. And honestly, I think this is one of the biggest hurdles for, especially in my experience at least, conservative Christian culture. A lot of the culture that I grew up in, there was kind of this idea that you could arrive, that you would hit a certain milestone, and then you just got to say, yeah, all right, I'm fixed, everything's good, I don't struggle with anything anymore. And, other than some minor things, but I don't have any large problems in my life. I am a very mature Christian. And yet, I think that the moment that you think you've arrived is the exact place where Satan is just waiting for you to show you just how much work still needs to be done, right? He's waiting there, just ready to blow it all up. And I also think, though, that that's also the place where God waits to meet you and remind you, hey, by the way, I'm God, not you. Because that thought of arrival, right, that we're good, we're done, we're ready, that really comes from a sense of pride and honestly a belief that we don't really need God anymore. Or that, he's just kind of like he used to be a big part of our life. Now he's a side character. Now we're the main character. Whereas that's not ever supposed to be the way it is. God is the main character of the story, and we are here in His story. And so He's always there. He's always a part of it. And we always continue to learn how we are supposed to be living into this story of His that we're a part of. And so I think there's always room to continue to dig up the dirt that we find in our hearts and our minds and to find a new place that needs healing. Because if we're honest, there's a lot of different ways that we need healing still. There's still a lot of brokenness to us, and each and every year just reveals a little more brokenness. And those are things that we have to continue to dig at, and we have to question, and we have to evaluate and look into. We have to discover more about ourselves, because partially we don't change, and yet our circumstances are always changing. Right? We don't change in many ways, but our circumstances are always changing, right? We're progressing to new phases of life. And the truth is that oftentimes when we feel like we've arrived, it's really that we've been able to reach a point where we're best equipped to handle our current circumstances in a way that we feel happy and content with. That's honestly how we go about it, right? We think we arrived because we're like, okay, things are good. I've gotten my kids to a certain point of independence, and I am able to live within this situation because I figured myself out. Right? I figured out all the hacks. I figured out all the little things that I do, all the little lies I tell myself. And yet, that only really works if your circumstances don't change. But our circumstances are constantly changing. Times are changing. Our culture is changing. Things around us are constantly in motion. And the truth is that many of these things are not things that we have ever prepared for. I think if you ask any pastor who was a pastor before COVID and thought that COVID was coming and then had to deal with how to be a pastor during and post-COVID, like the thick of COVID, they will tell you that they were not prepared. A large percentage of pastors seriously considered and did in fact end up leaving the pastorate because things had changed so much that it rocked their worlds. And I think a lot of them probably would have said that they felt like they were at a point where they were really comfortable with their leadership. They felt great about where their church was. They felt great about where their spiritual development was. They might have felt a little too content. And the truth is that works if your circumstances never change, but that's not how this world operates. And it's just based on the very fact that we are broken people, and Satan does not want us to continue to walk in relationship with God. Satan tries to push us away from God. And so as soon as we think we're safe, right, is when we let our guard down and we allow an opportunity for him to come back in and stir up some trouble. So one of the main examples I can think of from my personal life is when it comes to patience. I've always been a pretty patient person. I don't have a lot of trouble waiting for things. I'm probably, in some areas, I'm a little too patient, but they usually have to do with, patience with myself for accomplishing tasks. I'm very patient with myself in those areas. But, generally speaking, with other people in different contexts, I was pretty patient with them. I was able to put up with a lot. I think a lot of people who would maybe be put off by certain personality types, I typically have found, oh yeah, I can put up with that. I can deal with that. And so I remember at one point being in high school, like towards the end of high school, I'm like, gosh, I'm just such a patient person. I cringe just thinking about how I used to think that. I was like, man, I just think I'm way more patient than so many other people. I mean, it's like I could really teach some people about patience. And then I remember working as a camp counselor and thinking, shoot, I am not as patient as I thought I was. And that really stretched me. And through that experience, God really taught me, like, some people require just a completely different level of patience. And that there's more patience that you could develop within you. Even if you think you're really patient, you're not as patient as me. We're not as patient as God is. And God can still lend us more and more patience. And as a teenager, right, the number of, I think, emotional stressors or difficult decisions I'm making, they're not that high. And so, but when you're at a camp setting where you're trying to manage all these kids and they're all asking you for things, right? It's kind of like an early experience of what being a parent is like. Except the difference is you get to send these kids back at the end of the week, right? It's a precursor. And so I just remember, oh gosh, I have not learned patience like I thought I did. But there's still, you go through that and you experience that. And I remember afterwards, after a while, okay, it's been a couple years. Man, I think like looking back on that, I've grown a lot in my patience. I think I can really put up with a lot. And and I think God was kind of like, all right, we're going to test that. And we're going to see how patient you are. And then Katie and I adopted kids. And we love our kids, but they also drive us crazy sometimes. And they have especially pushed us to the brink of beyond where our patience is. We've left patience back in the dust on many occasion. And I think it just continues to reveal like these different circumstances. When circumstances change, we're not well equipped. We haven't been prepared to be patient or to be wise or discerning or to be loving in this different circumstance. All we know is what the circumstances that we were in previous. And so each new change, each new circumstances brings about a different opportunity for us to discover more about ourselves and to learn what type of people we are and what types of things we struggle with and how we need God to continue to step into our daily lives day after day to grow those things within us, to grow patience, to grow wisdom, to grow love and kindness and self-control. Those are all things that the more we move on with life, the more different hurdles we're going to have to overcome. We don't arrive in those areas. And so that's where especially my wife Katie has helped me a lot, because she's someone who naturally continued to ask questions about herself and continued to kind of explore, where am I at? How, what am I actually like? What can I actually put up with? And who am I as a person, right? Because those are things that we constantly have to kind of reevaluate. I think there's certain things that stay more steady over time as we mature as Christians. There's things we can always kind of fall back on. But the difference is that those things that we fall back on have to be rooted in godliness. They have to be rooted in our relationship with God, right? Because as soon as we claim those things for ourselves, that's when Satan keeps coming back, and our hearts and our minds are a little more muddied than we'd be willing to accept or think at a previous time. And so those things get stirred up because God wants us to grow closer to Him, not to try to build up character to the point that we can be separate from Him, right? The whole point of discovering more about ourselves is with the purpose of walking in closer relationship with God. To understand how we can do that, the ways that we can understand how He can grow us, how He can teach us and guide us, and how we can serve Him in new ways. Because God is going to continue to ask for more. He's going to continue to challenge us. He's going to continue to challenge what we've believed about ourselves, whether we thought we were so good at something that we arrived, or whether we've come to believe that we have an obstacle we're never going to overcome. God continues to meet us with the purpose of growing and transforming us more and more into his likeness. And so that requires being aware of our emotions, of where we are spiritually, of who we are as human beings, and how the different circumstances we find ourselves, how those change how we act and how we think. Because if we're honest, when we're stressed, all of those things that we thought about ourselves are really put to the test. And so there's always a benefit in continuing to reassess, look back at those things. In our discipling relationships, those are critical. They start out as really easy things. I think when we're discipling someone who's younger, it's really easy to kind of see the things that we need to dig up. And the longer and longer a discipleship relationship lasts, or the more mature or longer in the faith that someone is, the more nuanced those different emotional beliefs, those things, those hang-ups, that dirt we need to dig up on ourselves is. The harder it is to find it and dig it up. And oftentimes we see that something has been hidden so long and we believe for so long that we actually really need to tear that out of our hearts and our minds. And we need God to do that. But that's not going to happen unless we're willing to continue to go back and rethink how God has created us, in the sense that what we're capable of, both in an evil sense and in the sense of walking in godliness. So I hope that was helpful and you understand a little bit more about what you're supposed to be doing when it comes to helping people in their emotional health and discovery of who they are and who God has created them to be. And stay at it. Stick with it. It's important to continue to go back to that and reassess and continue to evaluate those different things that you have going on in your heart, because the circumstances are going to change and they're going to challenge what we once thought of ourselves. So hopefully I'll catch you next week. Have a great one.